For this story, we go back 5,000 years. And this is the story about the Indo Europeans. And so the Indo Europeans were this group of people that lived in kind of modern day Ukraine in that area. And these were a nomadic cattle herding people who figured out the horse. And upon figuring out the horse, they became very warlike. And so they went into Europe, they went into the Middle East, they went into India. And this is the story of them going into India. The reason why this is an interesting story is because this shows us the development of myth into philosophy. So when these people were in India, they were called the Aryans. And so Aryan is just the Sanskrit word for noble. At this time, there was a kind of crisis in spirituality because upon these people conquering India, they took their own religion and their own culture and they instituted as the high part of the society that they were in. These people, what they did was they had priests, and these priests are called rishis. These rishis would open themselves up to hear the gods and the song of the universe, and they would listen to it, and it eventually got written down after thousands of years of it being verbally communicated from generation to generation. So these sacred books are called the Vedas. And so the Vedas is so it comes from the Sanskrit word vid, which means knowledge. So if we look at the modern day English, we would say video. And so video means to see. So when you say you understand something, you say, I see what you mean. That is where that connection comes from. Because, of course, sight is always related to, well, like insight or knowledge, if that's how you want to understand it. So the Vedas, they are manifestations of knowledge, and it's a specific kind of knowledge. It's called Shruti knowledge, which means heard knowledge, because they listened to the gods, they listened to the universe, and that's where they got this inspiration to have this knowledge, as it were. So Shruti means heard, and if you look at Slavic languages, we say Chuti, which is just a little sound that's off, but it means the same thing. So it's heard knowledge. It's something you heard and you listened to, and then that's how you understood it. These rishis would now have these hymns and these words, and the words in which they use inspire the gods to do their will. That is the whole point of having and understanding these hymns. The hymns create the rituals, and then the rituals are the things that control nature. You invoke the gods through these rituals and hymns, and then they benefit the Aryan society because you get the gods to do what you want. Right? How they went about this is they would set up altars and they would do these rituals. And so the way in which this looked is it looked as it, so there was a fire in the center, and then people sat around the fire and they would throw things into the fire, and then that is an offering to the gods. A thing to note is that because these were nomadic people, it wasn't like they could just set up a temple and then that was their thing, and then that's the one thing that they prayed to. Instead, they prayed to everything, because everything around them as they moved was a part of them, right? So the sun, the rocks, the earth, the trees, the water, these are all things that they were trying to represent. So their altars were symbolic representations of the nature of the universe, because that is everything about them. So they had to move, they had to kill, they had to eat, they had to drink, and so they had to be warm in the winter. They had to be cold in the summer. All of these things are just aspects of the universe. So what they did is they represented these as aspects of the universe in their rituals. So you would come and you would sit around this fire, and what they would do is they would throw things into the fire, and then the fire they would call Agni. So Agni is the god of fire. And so Agni is also the mouth of the god. So anything you gave to Agni, so anything you burnt in sacrifice, that would feed the gods. And then the gods would do what you want because you have done the rituals, you've said the hymns, you've fed them what they wanted to eat, and now you have the power to control the gods. So this is that first stage where we go from myth to ritual. Then about 900 BC to 700 BC, you have the books called the Brahmanas. So the Brahmins were the priests, the Brahmanas were the books, and Brahman, he was the god. But now the idea of God, or the idea of Brahman, it's not that he is personified. He has no personification. There's no statue of him. There's no symbolization of him. Brahman is kind of like energy. So Br, the root, is energy. That's what that means. And so Brahman is the divine energy. He's not personified. There's no singular thing that you could like worship him as, because that's not how these people viewed it. So the Brahmanas are the ways in which you sacrificed. So they would have these long discussions about how much to sacrifice, what to sacrifice. Is it a pinch of salt? Is it a label of butter? Is it 3 whole pigs? Is it a pig and a half? It's all of these things that you would that they codified so that they knew how to sacrifice and what to sacrifice. The question was, of course, what is the point of the sacrifice? Why do we sacrifice? So the sacrifice is stronger than the gods. That's what they figured out. And now if the sacrifice is stronger than the gods, then that means the Brahmins can control the gods. So any man that has this ritualistic knowledge of myth and knowledge of religion, or just knowledge of the world, the universe, then then you control the gods and you get them to do whatever you want because you figured out the exact proportionate sacrifices to give depending on what the effect that you want them to have. So it gets to this point where, okay, so we control the sacrifice, which controls the gods, and the way in which we do that is by throwing things into a fire, by pouring an offering into a fire. So then they said, okay, wait, hold on. But if I eat, my body, the digestive systems, that's also a fire. So that's consuming something. So me eating something is me throwing an offering into a fire. Okay? When I want something, like when I have like my eyes, like the lust of the eyes, that's also a fire. To this day, we still say like my ears are burning when you hear something you might not necessarily want to hear. So then everything about me is an aspect of this fire. Okay. So that means the world itself is an ever-burning fire of sacrifice into which an inexhaustible sacrifice is being poured. And then they went, I see, that's the nature of life. So we are all being poured into the all-consuming fire of sacrifice. That's just what it is. So then what happens at this point is we get to kind of a crossroads. And so the crossroads is, well, do we feed that fire or do we quench that fire? And so if you look at kind of the Christian, Islamic, Judaic kind of way of looking at stuff, or even through the Jains, or these religions that don't go with this, they would say quench that fire, control yourself. The Hindus, Buddhists would say feed that fire, because the more you feed that fire, the more things die, the more things get to live. Because out of so life comes out of death, right? So the more that you create death, the more you create life. And this culture, these people, what they did is they accented that. So they said, okay, let's develop a passion for sacrifice. So let's kind of turn this into a thing, because this is the way the world goes. This is the way in which we control the gods. And because this is the way that we control the gods, then this is how we should be doing things. So then, after this stage, we have the Upanishads. And so Upanishads are somewhere probably, around like 9 to 800 BC. And these Upanishads figured out this entire lesson in what the philosophy of what this is. It's the idea that the gods are actually in yourself. So to the Hindus, or these Vedic Aryans, they figured out, well, if all energies of myself are just personifications of the gods, which means if I'm angry, the anger is just a god in which we have come up with and personified it. And so we would say, that's this god and this god and this god and this god. Well then, if I just sacrifice to myself, if I feed myself properly, if I take all the things that I need to, then I am doing as the gods do. As the gods do. I don't have to sacrifice anything out there. Everything I'm sacrificing is in here already, because all the gods are just personifications of the energies that I have within myself as it is. And so then we get to kind of the modern interpretation, or the idea of, and this is just one perspective in which we could look at it like this. So we understand that we are this will, this thing of that, this thing of the universe, the sacrificed self, the offering. So we are both the offering and the sacrifice. And what we should do then is we should come to the idea of trying to find the fire within ourselves. And this, of course, is all metaphorical. But the idea is that you do the psychological act of seeing the difference between your will, the energy that you are, Brahman, the fire, and then you have the outside characteristics about you that are just those things you can't really control. So you have, the actual physical transforming aspects of yourself, your body, your age, your height, all those things about you. Those are all simply just kind of inflections of what you actually are, which is the universe. It's everything else. It is, you are the will incarnate, and then you are identifying yourself more with the will and not with the aspects about yourself which are just kind of inflections of everything else. We can look at this from the psychological standpoint of kind of like the ego. It's the same idea. If you're identifying yourself with your ego, you're identifying with yourself with not the will, but those other outside aspects which are just secondary to the true nature of what you are. And the true nature of what you are is, as I've already said, is you are Brahman. You are the energies of the universe. You are the will. And then that is the thing that actually, when you identify with yourself primarily, all of the other aspects become secondary.